we've kind of cascaded down through in today's proceedings, right from national ACCC level through to the dirty boots version of support that's available to you, the models of codes of conduct, the role of the Small Business Commissioner. Now we're going and a real life case study through the Dairy Industry Association. Now what we're going to finish the proceedings with is the current code of conduct that is in place, and we're going to have Ashley Keegan speak with you about that. Let me just bring Ashley's slide up here. So for those of you who don't know Ashley, he's the Group Chief Executive Officer for Food and Beverage Australia Limited, or FABLE, but he's also a Code Committee representative for Australian Grape and Wine. Ashley is a chiropractor. So there you go. We've got a chiropractor, we've got territory cops, we've got lawyers, we've got everyone in here today. But Ashley fell into the industry almost by accident during what was supposed to be a short stint helping out his wife's family vineyard. It sparked the passion in him. So from cracking backs, he's gone and developed a family-based operation into a large premium operation in Western Australia, and took the opportunity to come to South Australia and take on the Chief Viticulturalist role for FABLE operations. After 13 years with the company back in 2012, Ashley took over as the Chief Executive Officer for FABLE Operations. And if you're not aware, FABLE is one of Australia's larger vineyard and agricultural management groups, and they manage about 1,800 hectares of vineyards spread over 20 sites around the country. Ashley has a qualification, Bachelor of Applied Science in Chiropractic, Bachelor of Applied Science in Viticulture, an MBA in Finance. He's a current board member of Australian Grape and Wine, current chairman of the Vignerons Committee, and a member, I've got to get this takes a bit of breath work, this one, a member of the Code Management Committee and Audit, Financial Security and Remuneration Committees. He's also participated in the Future Leaders program and holds a number of board directorships outside the industry. He's going to talk today about the voluntary code of conduct for Australian wine grape purchases, operations and governance. Please welcome Mr. Ashley Keegan.
Thanks, Troy. Thanks for the introduction. First, I'd just like to start by saying an enormous thank you to Lisa, Adrian and the Wine Grape Council team for bringing us together in this really structured way to talk about this topical topic. It's been fantastic and something that we needed to do. I'd like to say an enormous thank you for the subject-specific experts that have come before me. It's fantastic to get that level of insight, because most of us in the room come to this growing grapes for a living, or maybe making wine. And it's completely natural that we bring to that sort of a filter or a lens that we look through that's sort of influenced by our day-to-day lives. So to have that sort of expert subject matter come in at a high level, widen our fields of view, is just a fantastic insight for us. And I've scribbled that many notes, it's not funny today. But this is where the wheels could fall off, because Narissa, I'm stumping your short straw, and I'm sitting here today because what was supposed to be happening was that the industry icon Peter Hayes, who's a fantastic independent chairman of our Code Management Committee, was supposed to be here today and present, but Pete wasn't able to attend, so I'm even your plan B. So Narissa, you've got nothing on me, all right? But, so one of the things, I've got a really clear goal. I've got 25 minutes, and my goal is very simple, is to add as much value to the equation as I possibly can, as much value to the discussion as I can. With that in mind, what I'm not going to do is repeat all the detail about the nuances of the codes, from a voluntary to a mandatory. You know, the previous speakers have done an amazing job outlining the architecture of that for us. That's of no value for me to do that. If you're super keen and you really want to know what clause 5.1.3 is of our code, please go onto the website, have a look at that. Look at the frequently asked questions, and also on there is our annual reports. And it's I completely sound ludicrous saying this in front of the public, but go and read our annual report, because normally I'd rather throw sand in my own eyes than read annual reports. But really simple, really succinct summary of what we do from a code management point of view. But what I decided to do is I want to put myself in your shoes, sitting out in the audience as a grape grower or a winemaker, and give you an understanding of the workings of the current Code Management Committee. I want to transfer what I know and what I've experienced over 3.5 years as volunteer sitting on the Code Management Committee. I'm going to give you a bit of an idea of what it is. I'm going to briefly touch on the code, how we got there, who we are as a Code Management Committee, what we do, what we don't do, what works and what doesn't work. And I'm also going to point at the elephant in the corner of the room and chuck a couple of stones of things that we can do better. So very briefly, there we go. So the code, really, my view on what the code is, it's effectively a moral compass that should guide exactly how we want to behave as a supply chain. So from an industry perspective, as growers and winemakers in that supply chain, it's a North Star as to how we should behave. We've heard today about minimum standards. I think it can be better than that. I think it can be define what best practice is for us as we move together in that context. Sure, it's supposed to look at mischievous conduct or opportunistic behaviour, but really, to me, it should be about exactly how we want our relationship to foster and move through. Ours is, as we've said, it's a non-prescribed situation, so it's flexibility. One of the things that the Code Management do is we do assess and look at it and change it as we need to change that, but it's not mandatory. You don't have to sign that, and that's something you're going to hear me repeat several times through my presentation today, that it is not mandatory. And if we really want to get successful with respect to the code, then we need to change some of the uptake in that context. Okay, so how did we get here? Back in 2008, Wine Grape Council Association, Wine Grape Growers Association, and WGCSA came together and hammered out that first code back in 2008. When AGW was formed, that morphed and that became the administrative body for the code at that particular point in time. As we've heard today, in 2019, Mick and the ACCC team undertook a detailed review from a wine market and industry perspective. And as a result of that, 2020, November, another code was put out with a couple of material changes in that place. We continually to iterate the code, and I think the version that we're on at the moment is dated September 2021. A couple of things came out of that review that Bruce touched on as well. One was a big elbow in the ribs saying, hey, get more people signed up to this code. The second was demonstrate some stewardship of this with the custodian and creation of the Code Management Committee. And hence why I'm standing here today. Code Management Committee, who are we? We're a committee put together by a selection of AGW's representatives, both grape growers and winemakers, came together to nominate and select a group of grape growers and winemakers. It has to be 50-50 that forms the Code Management Committee. We're very, very lucky as well. We've got Murray Valley Wine Growers and Riverina. We've got Paul and Jeremy, who are observers. But I can tell you, at the committee level meeting, they're in there, they're part of the team, they're interacting with the rest of us in the decisions that we make. What do we do? So fundamentally, there's some fundamental responsibilities we've got as a Code Management Committee, but ultimately we're custodians of the code. It's our responsibility to monitor its performance. We're going to improve the code. We can adapt the code. We can, if we need to, lean in and dig into some the disputes if they're arising. But to be frank, that rarely happens. The Secretariat and the way that the process works generally takes care of that. We've got an administrative requirement, Anna's got an administrative requirement. She puts together that fantastic annual report for us. And it's got a couple of fundamental things in there that I think growers should be aware of. What I really like is a really succinct, very high-level snapshot of the disputes that went on in the last year, and they're worth a read. They're anonymous and they're high-level, but it gives you a bit of a sense of what's going through from an industry point of view. And I think one of the other things that shows up in that annual report that every grower should know is a full list of who's signatory of the code. But what does it look like at a practical level? So that's what it says we're supposed to do, but what does it actually look like? What I thought I'd do is, we've just recently had a meeting, I think a few weeks ago, and I thought I'm going to step you through what we did in that meeting, just give you a sense of what goes on and how do we interact as a committee. So that was the first meeting after the 2024 vintage. So what we did, was really go region by region and dig in quite deeply to understand all of the impacts, all of the factors that were impacting from region by region. You know, even down to the climatic stuff, ripening, disease pressure, the market conditions in particular. Was there fruit left on the vine? Was there predatory low pricing structure? Were there bomes that were taken too high? We really dig in and try to understand that, not because we just sit around and want to chat about what went on with the Australian Grape, but we've got a responsibility to look at that through the filter of the code and the lens. Are we seeing nuances, behaviours that we need to think, does the code need to be adapted? Does the code need to react in some way, shape or form to do that? The other thing that we did is we look at the disputes. So we look at both the formal disputes. So we go through and we get a report from the Secretariat as to the nature of the disputes that have gone on. We also went through and reviewed what I'll call as the informal disputes. So this year, AGW created a situation where growers maybe just a bit uncertain, not 100% sure. They can ring up or they can drop an email to Anna. And if you're a grape grower, then you're given access to a confidential ability to have a chat with a grower representative. And that's me this year. So I would get a phone call or an email or get the details and I'd call the grower back and have an interaction with that grower. I'm not being their lawyer. I'm just simply giving them a sounding board and giving them some assistance to navigate through that process and understand what some options are, or if it's a simple question or just a judgment call, that I can try to help them as much as I can. So I sort of tried to give the committee an understanding of those informal natures of those inquiries that we were looking at as well. Sandy came in, and Sandy's here. I think she gave us a fantastic review of the market price transparency project, and Luke, sort of put his hand up before and explained that, and we got a look at that, and it is a really useful tool. And Sandy dug in behind the scenes, who's using it, how often it's getting used, and it is a really successful project that I think Jim and the team have put together, because it's getting a lot of use, and it's something that obviously from a code perspective is one of the goals. It's one of the things that we've been, belted on the back of the head saying, hey, get it right. We need to improve this situation. So be aware that's there. And Sandy, I think, gave us that sort of deeper insight into it. The other thing that we do, and I think as a responsibility from a code management committee point of view, is we've got an obligation sort of stare off into the distance a bit and be an early warning system to see some of the things that are going on. Are there trends? Are there nuances? Are there behaviours? Are there situations morphing in the market that we may need to be aware of, and perhaps be thinking about the currency of the code? How does it maybe need to be adapted to sort of ward off some of those things? And one of the topics that popped up, and Marty and some of the AWI team are here, but we talked about smoke taint. I don't know if any of you in the room have had to deal with a full-blown smoke taint issue, but it's a bastard of a situation to work through for both parties. It's really, really, really tough, and it's a really complex, high-stakes issue for it. So there's some new research coming on that looking at these sentinel posts to be able to monitor, and maybe there's a smoke taint event, look at an issue, whether it's low, medium or high-grade risk in that. And we're like, well, this is high impact from a grower's point of view. And similarly, from a winemaker's perspective, and don't mind me mentioning, Fiona's saying, hey, this is really important from a winemaking and grape grower perspective. We need to get it right. So what we don't want to see is just sort of clauses start slipping into contracts where, hang on, we're not 100% sure that this system yet, this robustness of this system is the right system to make these really high impact decisions. So what we came together and did was endorse the movement towards what's called an IESP, which is an industry endorsed standard procedure. So that's sort of saying, okay, we like the direction that's going, but we want it to be really robust and objective in that context. So I think from a management committee point of view, we get to have that sort of oversight, and I think it's one of our core responsibilities to move forward and look at some of that, future issues. But how does it actually work in the committee? So people often roll their eyes, another industry committee, another subcommittee selected by a committee that sit around and do stuff. I'm really quite proud to sit on and volunteer onto the code management committee, because I get to sit around with some serious industry horsepower. There's some fantastic legal minds. There's some excellence in winery operations, there's generational grape growers, there's fantastic regional representatives, really good technical stuff, and a moderately competent viticulturist / CEO shows up every now and then again as well. But it's a really functional group. Apparently our mandate says that to make a resolution we have to have 75% agreement in that. I can't remember in my 3.5 years where we haven't reached effectively by consensus that. But please do not make the mistake and assume that it's all kumbaya and that we don't lean in, we don't have vigorous, robust discussions, because we do. We're professionals, we operate under the competition law, the conflict of interest, but where we need to, we're going to lean in. We have the difficult conversations that we need to without fear nor favour. Rest assured that's done. And I'd like to publicly thank Peter Hayes as our chair, because he expects it of us. He creates a forum, he creates an environment where that's expected of us. We're there to do a job, and that's the expectation that we operate under. So, what about the elephants in the room? What about the things that don't work, the limitations that we've got? Well, in my opinion, that the code's really effective at dealing with issues when there's a signatory. It's almost impotent when it comes to dealing with a non-signatory. At 60 to 70% of intake, my view is it's simply not good enough. And it's going to be, again, the common theme that I'm talking about here today. When you read the Secretariat's report, they'll report on any dispute, whether that's a signatory or not, because, by definition, people still get on the phone to the signatory, to the Secretariat, And you'll see in the reports, if you read the annual report, that there are disputes, and it'll break down whether the resolution was achieved or not. And there is a reasonable percentage of non-signatories showing up. I'm comfortable to tell you of the informal conversations that I had, the majority of those were non-signatories. The second dot point on the screen is an important. As a code management committee, we've heard very clearly we don't have legislative, regulatory powers. We don't create sanctions. What we can do is report the breaches if we see that. In my experience over the journey, for signatories, it's not necessary, because the code's taken care of most of that. The code's dealt with that through the system of the Secretariat and the experts that the Secretariat will engage. The third dot point's a bit obvious, and we've heard it, and I think Jeff made the comment about the fact that it doesn't matter what type of code you've got, we operate in a free market environment. The code's not going to fix the market. The code's not going to dictate those prices. So we've got to be careful about what the problem that we're trying to solve. The last point on the screen, in my opinion, is the single biggest issue facing Australian grape grower base at the moment. It's hard to stick your head up and complain if you're worried about the fear of retribution. If I complain, they won't buy my fruit. This is where we're going to need to get better, I think, from an industry perspective. But it's a reality at the moment that wine companies are gating growers in, out, given the supply-demand situation. So it's a bit naive for us and for me to stand here and go, you know what, a track record of dispute may impact that decision. So my advice to all the growers in the room is really simple. I think you can disagree without being disagreeable. And I'll say that again. You can disagree without being disagreeable. It's okay asking genuine questions, seeking clarification, and if in doubt, asking for some external support, politely and professionally, it's okay. Andrew Weeks mentioned to me before at lunch about a presentation I gave over 12 years ago, I think it was. It was, and I'll be polite, but I think Bruce got to say shit, but it used to drive me bananas about the variability of field grading and pricing structures that permeated our industry. It really used to just get up my goat, the subjectivity of that, and as I watched it across all the regions, multiple different companies. And I was asked to go and present at the Mildura conference for the ASVO, and the topic was commercial impacts of grading systems. And I thought, bloody hell, I've got a couple of choices here. I can stand up and politely say, gee, it's really hard and it's subjective and there's no black box to grade fruit, and then walk quietly off the stage. Or I could stand up there and tell you what I really thought. So what I did was I put up on the slide about a dozen GPS tracks of winemakers walking into my paddock, walking into our paddocks, 2 or 3 panels deep, tasting a few grapes, walking out and making decisions that were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I didn't embarrass anybody. I made 100% sure that you could not identify the region or the block, and at the time I was growing for lots and lots of different wine companies over lots of regions, so there was anonymity in my data. I didn't yell and scream. What I did do was then put up some GPS tracks of the dozens of passes that grape growers do to grow that hectare, the hundreds of hours that grape growers used to farm that hectare. And then what I did was explain the impact, the financial impact of that single decision versus the impact that growers can have with any other lever, and how it just paled into the significance of that particular decision. It's okay to ask the question. It's okay to ask for that support and point at the elephants if we do it the right way. All right. The other thing, okay, so in terms of the fear of retribution, really interesting. Jim Caddy's sitting down the back staring at me, and a few meetings ago came up with a really insightful comment. We were discussing the Food and Grocery Code, and there was a report from winemakers dealing with the retailers, and it was how the wine companies fear the delisting, the come off the shelf if they make a complaint about the behaviour. And Jim sort of said, oh, it's interesting, if you cross out retailers, put in winemakers, and cross out winemakers and put in growers, and reread the complaint, it's almost exactly the same situation that we face as a grape growing winemaking relationship. So I think right through our supply chain, we need to point at that, and we need to get better at it. We need to get better systems in the context of dealing with that. But let's assume that you choose to pull the trigger on a complaint. So I'll go back. So if there's a clear dispute process that we go through. The Code Committee can make a decision or make some assessments as to whether there's been a breach or not. There's a nature of different breaches or complaints that can be listed there. But ultimately what happens is that there's a complaint goes through to the Secretariat. It's an independent Secretariat, and that there's a communication between the Secretariat and the grower to start that process. As I alluded to before, this year there's also a bit of an informal approach where if you're just uncertain about the process or you're not 100% sure how to navigate that you can pick up the phone or drop an email to Anna, and if required, then you get my phone number or my email address, and we can step you through and help you deal with that. It's pretty straightforward. On the website, there's a simple page. You go follow the arrows through there through to dispute resolution, end up in the templates, and you've got a notice of dispute, and probably what's going to happen at that point in time, you're going to get an industry expert, someone like Jen Venus, who's going to show up in your paddock and help make a decision in that context. This is my last slide. So we're here talking about mandatory versus voluntary codes of conduct. And I'm simply not here to decide for you whether that's either one is the best idea or the best solution. But I am comfortable to make a few of the following comments. In my experience, the voluntary code works really effectively for those who are signatories. It does virtually nothing for those who are not. Who in the room's, for the growers in the room, who in the room's been asked by their wine company to be SWA certified or head towards SWA certified? Put your hand up for me. I'd say most of us. Who in the room has asked a prospective grape supply or a wine supply company or a wine contracting company, are you a signatory of the Code of Conduct? A couple. Why not? Why not? One of the things I'm going to ask you to do is when you leave here and you go back to your businesses and you're next having a conversation with your wine company or wine customer, then I want you to have a conversation that might go something like this. Hey, Max, I'm just wondering whether you as a company are a signatory of the Code of Conduct. You see, I've got this strategy. I want all of my grapes on my property coming under the Code of Conduct because I reckon that's the system, that's the process, that's how we make a better industry. If you're not a signatory, is there any limitation for you to becoming one? And if you're a bit cheeky, you might follow up and go, hey, Max, there's no cost associated with the code other than the commitment. Unlike my SWA certification, which takes me weeks and costs me $3,000 a tonne. I think it's okay. I think it's okay for us. As individual growers, we can ask a question and we shift the needle this much. There's 6,000 of us across the country, and if we all ask the same questions, that resonates. That shifts the momentum of the conversation, and maybe we shift the needle in a bit more of a direction. The next observation I'm going to make is a bleeding obvious for all of us in this room, really, and that the industry is in gross oversupply. We've never had it tougher. Voluntary or mandatory code, I don't think it's going to help me shift the hundreds of tonnes of Langhorne Creek Shiraz that I don't have a home for at the moment. Voluntary or mandatory, I don't think they either are going to fix the fact that I'm more exposed to the spot market than I ever have been in my 27 years as a grape grower. My point really is clear. There's an enormous amount of duress out there in the market. And we're going to look at every tool that we can, roll every rock to help make that better, but there are no magic bullets. We have a structural oversupply of the industry, and it's so stark. We need to be really careful about the unintended consequences of the decisions that we're going to collectively make. It'd be fair to say there's a significant cohort, both in the winemaking and the grape growing sense, that are in a survival mode. We're having to make, by necessity, we're having to make some really short-term, tough, ugly, counterintuitive decisions just to balance the books. And it's likely that's going to continue for some time. If we're going to choose to change the fabric of our operating system with some mandatory hurdles, I'm not sure, and I'm very comfortable standing up here and putting my hand up saying, I'm not sure what that might morph into yet. I'm not sure about the unintended consequences. It might be good, it might be neutral, it might be something that is an unintended consequence that I can't conceive at the moment. Let me give you an example, and it's topical because when we first did Troy's punch the comments in, it came up, and I'll use an example of 30-day payment terms. Do I want 30-day payment terms? I'm a grape grower. Hell yeah. Do I want someone to buy my grapes? Double hell yeah. You know, I think I'm fortunate enough, maybe it's not the right age. I grow for about 45 different wine companies. I'm the CEO of a grape growing company, and I worry about cash flow every day, most days, and I find 4 a.m. is a pretty good time to worry about it. I'm pretty good at worrying about it at that point in time. But of my 45 customers, I've known most of them for decades. I know their businesses, I'm mates with them, I'm the CEO of a company. And what I've done in thinking about this today is step across into that business. Step across. Now imagine myself as a CEO of a small or medium wine company. I know I'm struggling from a cash flow point of view. I've been operating on a third of payments because I'm in South Australia, and I've been doing that for a couple of decades, and my cash flow is pretty tough. Let's assume that a 30-day payment schedule comes into play. What am I going to do as the CEO of that business? What I reckon I would actually do is I'm probably going to go and secure the grapes that are absolutely required for my Icon products. Those blending parcels that I really, really need. And I'm going to secure the parcel of that really high-grade fruit that if I don't, I'm going to lose it, and Frank down the road is going to lock it up and I'll never get back to it. So I'm going to do that. Pretty much for everything else, what I reckon I'm going to do is shift into a wine buying situation. because that's going to do two things for my cash flow. Well, it's going to probably do three things. Because I'm not going to get caught up in this sort of really tight cycle that's going to be there. I've kept my powder dry and I've got time to make some decisions. And right at the moment, there's plenty of wine in the market, and I can probably buy wine for lower cost than what it costs me to send through the process. But importantly, really importantly, I'm going to buy that wine out here the day before I send it into bottling, which is proximal to when I'm selling it to when I get my cash back. There's a material amount of cash influence that could possibly have. So I think we need to be careful, and because the reality is we're all locked into a bit more of short-term thinking. I know as that pseudo-CEO of that wine company, that's not great for my long-term relationships. It's not great for the sustainability. I've just burned Keegan, and I thought he, was a reasonable bloke, and I've been dealing with, but I've just burned him because I've had to think in these short-term paths. It's probably going to impact my quality, but I'll have to worry about repairing those bridges next year when I get across that bridge for this year. And that's the reality of the situation. I think our ability to be, another observation I make, is the ability to be flexible and adapt is going to be really important. I was talking to Ben earlier today going that, we're in such a state of volatility that we, if we pretend that we know what's happening in the sort of medium and short-term future, you've got a better crystal ball than I've got. So that adaptability and flexibility is going to be really important. By nature, the mandatory code's a bit more of a legislative, regulatory beast. And if we need to change it, and we've heard on multiple occasions today, it's not a code management committee, it's a more regulated, structured political process that we're going through to do that. It's not necessarily be all bad, and John sort of outlined that you can build those processes in place in 2 and 5 years, but I guess every time we meet, we sit there and consider the suitability of what the current code that we've got is. In summary, I think we're prepared, we're pertaining to this sort of mandatory voluntary code. It's a really important variable for us at this time from an industry perspective. But irrespective of any collective decision we make, we're not going to wake up tomorrow to a fixed industry. And I think that's really important. And I think Bruce touched on it about think about what the problem is that we're trying to solve. We've got challenges on many fronts. And we need to do our very best, and I love the word, it's been used a couple of times today, to try to maintain some level of symbiotic relationship so that we can come through this as a sustainable, viable, flexible industry as we move forward. So I think, I'd finish with Darwin's quote where he talks about the fact that it's not the strongest or the fittest. Well, I'd argue with Darwin, I'd like a strong balance sheet because it might help get through, but it's the most able to the species most able to adapt that survives. So I think we need to continue to make sure that we've got that flexibility and adaptation. I'd like to finish on something absolutely got nothing to do with codes and mandatory but it's a topic that I know Lisa's super and passionate about, and so am I, because we've talked about it on many occasions. We talk a lot about some of the industry challenges and woes and tonnes and tables and supply, demand and export markets, but behind every one of those tonnes is a grape grower. And every one of those grape growers is doing it really tough at the moment. And it's really important, please, 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 as a grower, if you're struggling and you need a hand and you've got a challenge, you just need to bounce. There's an enormous amount of support there. I've noticed that Chris and Retta and the Rural Business Solution guys are here. You've got to start to reach out at some of this stuff as well. You've got fantastic regional associations with really super great people. You've got Lisa here at a state level who's an absolute champion of looking after human beings. And I take my responsibility as chair of the Vignerons Committee really seriously. And, I think my phone number's there, my email's there. If you just need a chat, please get on the phone and yell out. So I'll finish up there, and I'd just like to say thanks very much for the opportunity to chat with you today. So thanks.
Thank you, Ashley.